Good evening, wherever you might be joining us. This is the Up on Cyber podcast presented by Ariento. Today is Thursday, May 20th, 2021, and we're joined by Leo Lebel. He is a technical solutions architect for Cisco Systems, and he has over 25 years of experience. Started his career as a Marine Corps, enlisted chief warrant officer, cybersecurity officer, we'll call it, to kind of sum it all up. But he has done security and IT and even compliance, I would guess, at the highest levels of the United States government and military. He has a bachelor's in science in information technology and several industry certifications from Cisco, Comptia, Fortinet, ISC Squared, Microsoft, ITIL, and kind of the main reason he's joining us today is to talk about CMMC, as Leo's one of the original, I think the first class of CMMC Provisional Assessors, going way back to last year. And so we're here as part of our Ask a Provisional Assessor series to run through some questions with him. So Leo, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it, and welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, so we'll jump right in. So warning, we put some questions out on social media, and we got some responses back in terms of obviously there's CMMC is a hot topic, and there's a lot of things, a lot of clarity that is slowly coming out since the model came out in January of 2020. But a lot of things still to be clarified, and we turn to kind of the provisional assessors to do the best in these gray areas. So one of these questions that we got a lot when we started this series is about scoping, and it's a big conversation out there. Everybody's waiting for the DoD to release guidance on how these assessments are going to be scoped. How do you recommend to your clients that they approach scope today in absence of that DoD guidance?
Yeah, so if you look at the foundation of CMMC, it's about protecting CUI, CTI, and FCI data. So as an assessor, that was the number one goal during our training, was to make sure that we understood that wherever those things go, the customer needs to protect those. So if you're transmitting this off into the cloud, if you're sharing this data with research institutions, or if you're in some of the siloed operations like healthcare research or maybe oceanic research, how do you get that data into that environment, and how do you protect it when it's in there? So if you stick to those fundamentals, the scope is determined by where this stuff goes. And I always try to tell customers that it's sometimes difficult to take your existing infrastructure and just sprinkle some cybersecurity on top of it, and then it becomes CMMC. It's really much more challenging that. And when you look at it, you want to make sure that it's always least privilege and least amount of people. Because really the technical solutions are very, very simple, executing those, but getting to the behavior to change, and then also getting communicators to communicate, right? We've got researchers that go, hey, I don't care how the water gets to the faucet. I need to be able to do my job and execute this contract and provide this, whatever, either a widget or research information and so on. And then when it really gets challenging is when you look at the healthcare and the scientific communities when it comes to research. The healthcare community has these huge machines that may be MRIs or CTIs that are $5-6 million a piece or even more. How do you use that infrastructure and share that information from those devices without compromising the research or the CUI that's created on the fly? So some of those interesting corner cases are, to put it simply, stressing out these organizations, because they're like, we want to be able to bring in this revenue, but how can we do it with all these different nuances that need to be addressed? And then how do we do it securely? And really, if you're a cybersecurity practitioner, the answer should never be no. It's no right now, but we're going to show you how to do it securely, and we're going to be able to help you achieve what the outcomes that you're looking for. And that's really the goal of CMMC. Is we don't want to hinder anyone, we don't want to slow anyone down, we want to continue the flow of operations for everyone, but we need to make sure that we minimize the addressable danger field or our threat landscape. We want to minimize that as much as possible, because it only makes the CMMC certification even more difficult. And if you look from a scoping perspective, if you're trying to boil the ocean, you'll never get it done in the first place. But if you were, let's just say that magically you could get there, the durability of that maturity certification is much more difficult to maintain over a 3-year period.
I like that term. I hadn't heard that, durability. Okay, so along those lines, so if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying, hey, follow the data, but narrow scope as much as possible. A lot of talk about cloud enclave solutions, right? And you see some out there that, hey, this is turnkey, this is, do this and you'll be CMMC compliant. What's your take on them? Can they meet compliance? Is that something you recommend?
Yeah, well, so I think we should explore all options, because I know that there's a lot of cost concerns out there of, hey, if we got to build out this enclave, we don't want to buy all this hardware and infrastructure and then adding personnel and expenses on top of that. If you look at, the cloud computing designs that are out there, you can easily achieve the CMMC certification. The problem you're going to run into is that when it comes to asking, the big three out there, for example, Azure, AWS, and let's just say Google or Oracle clouds, for them to participate in the CMMC certification is going to be difficult. It's going to take a lot of coordination. And all I would do is caution anyone that's looking to go to a cloud solution, you should get a guarantee in writing that they're going to provide you with some person that is qualified to go through the certification process for the ownership of the things that they're required to provide those services. So, if you look at a responsibility matrix across a lot of these cloud providers, they try to make it as simple for the customer, but they also they want to make it as simple for them as a provider, so they're not burdened down with a bunch of, extracurricular activities. And CMMC really is outside the normal scope of any cloud service provider. So we are seeing a lot of these cloud service providers, the lights are coming on, they see that this is a revenue source for them, and they're starting to become part of the conversation now, and they're starting to show up to webinars and the town halls at the CMMC AB on how can they help the customers get to this CMMC certification, fastest path, but also a path that is sustainable from over time frame. And what I mean by that is, if you're carrying and feeding for servers and data centers and all these things in support of CMMC, what happens if you got a 6-month gap in a contract? You go, well, I still got to run all these things. But it becomes more attractive if you have a cloud offering that you can use that, and you can spin up these services and spin them down as either the contract gets larger or smaller, or the contract ends and you're soliciting another contract. So those are the things that I would look at, but just making sure the cloud provider has a stake in that certification, making sure that happens contractually is an important aspect of that.
One of the other hot topics that I'm guessing you might tell me ties into this is the whole reciprocity conversation. If you are looking for a cloud solution or cloud provider, do you fall into do you recommend going with FedRAMP providers? Is that a must, or wait for the reciprocity guidelines?
Well, so I think, if you look at the goals of FedRAMP are genuinely to secure that data. Now, it may not necessarily meet the requirements of CMMC, but I would say it's a good start. If you're looking at certain FedRAMP offerings that are out there, I would take the CMMC assessment guide and hand that off to that prospective cloud provider and say, hey, what are you going to do to meet these requirements in FedRAMP? And then, if they do have, I know reciprocity is not out there today, but it would make good sense if the DoD said, hey, FedRAMP providers, give me a list of all the things that you support as objective evidence, and what can you provide to us? And then what are the deltas between what we're responsible for and what you're responsible for? And then how do we satisfy those requirements as a team, instead of having these siloed approaches of where, hey, I'm just going to use them for storage, but then, who's the underlying technicians that are touching this hardware? Who are, doing the maintenance of the software? Are they personnel that are cleared? And FedRAMP does provide some of that, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they meet all the controls. And if they do meet the controls, prove it. And that's really where these service providers are kind of juggling a bunch of glass balls, trying to figure out which ones can be dropped and which ones can't be. And that's where I think a lot more work has to be done in that category.
Yeah, no, that's good advice. You work with a lot of different companies. I know, kind of consulting on this. What's the biggest challenge that you've seen in your CMMC clients, and the things that they struggle with the most about CMMC?
So the two biggest problems I see are not technical related at all.
Mhm.
One problem I see is that these organizations that are doing, let's just say R1 level research, their campuses are so large, and they have, as an example, there's some schools in Southern California that have upwards of 2,000 or 3,000 researchers, those including students, and this is actual faculty. And then there's no documentation surrounding these relationships. They haven't identified the roles and responsibilities for these folks. Their non-disclosure agreements are loose, if any. Then we also see that there's a huge disconnect between the cybersecurity practitioners that are on the front lines and the CIOs and the CISOs. So when I'm having conversations at both ends of those spectrums, there's a huge disconnect. So I would say that the physical human behavior is the biggest challenge you're going to find with any of these things, because you have folks like, for example, researchers go, hey, I don't really care about your rules. I have a job to do, and if I can't do my job and satisfy these requirements, then you're failing me. And then from an IT perspective, they go back to the researchers and say, well, the things you're trying to do don't meet the requirements for CMMC. So there's that, battle that happens continuously on the human side that really doesn't have anything to do with the technical controls themselves. It's personalities, it's the old system. It was good enough in their minds, and we know that isn't, because there wouldn't be all the headlines out there for all this intellectual property being stolen and so on if their previous methods were effective. And to be honest with you, I worked for the government for 20 years. I'm very pleased to see that the U.S. government's taking it very seriously now with cybersecurity. And as a taxpayer, my personal opinion is, if you're going to use my money to go do great things for our nation, protect those things, so that other folks outside the country that are trying to use those technologies against us aren't able to. And it's just being a good steward of taxpayers' dollars.
So along those lines, you are a retired Marine Chief Warrant Officer. You have done this at the highest levels when it comes to security and national security. You've seen kind of the gamut in terms of, I'm sure, certification and accreditation packages, DIACAP, RMF, NIST. Granted, some of that might be from a military perspective, but how do you evaluate CMMC so far compared to some of these past efforts? Is it accomplishing its goal of securing the defense industrial base? Is it too much of a burden? Where do you evaluate it as right now, and kind of where it's going?
No, I think it's a good start. And the reason why I think it's a good start is because the previous self-certification, we know that just didn't work. Otherwise, the headlines wouldn't be there. But from another perspective is, I'd like to see the DoD hold themselves to the same standard that they're asking third parties to do. And when I was in the DoD, it was, kind of a commander's thing, whether they were going to enforce certain things or another. There was always the aspect of, hey, my colonel buddy here needs access to this, just make it happen. I don't care what policy it violates. Or you have, these generals out there that go, hey, I don't want to use my pack because I forget it in my office all the time and I can't go to the grocery store. So can I just leave it in there and just give me a password, or can I just keep my ID card and give me a password? So when you remove all that and you make it a third-party certification, that means that they've looked at those controls are effective, and they meet the requirements of that. Now, if these organizations deviate from that once they become certified, then we simply know that the issue is not a compliance issue, it's a human behavior issue. But when you separate those duties and the certification, it puts a lot more teeth in it, because if you lose a certification, you lose the money, right? And that's really where folks are starting to open their eyes up and go, hey, that's a revenue stream that I need to maintain my organization. If I don't have that revenue stream, it's just not going to work out. And then we're going to lose jobs, or we'll lose infrastructure and so on. But the folks that I see that, these R1 schools, even states now, are looking at it and saying, listen, I can create my own CMMC enclave. I can let all these universities reach in there and do those things. We can do it securely. We can share information. They're looking at this where they can become a service provider within themselves to be able to satisfy those requirements. So I think innovation is key in this, where CMMC says, well, the days of doing things manually, those need to go because they're too costly. So we got to look at things like orchestration. We got to look at automation. We got to look at policy engines that match CMMC requirements. And when you start thinking smart like that, going, hey, if we don't get the certification, we lose a lot of money. But if we do get the certification, we can be smarter with our money. We can be faster. We can be more strategic instead of tactical. And then when you have that mindset, then the only thing that's going to prevent you from succeeding is your own pitfalls that you run into. And that goes back to that human relationship, human behavior situation, which, I don't know if we'll ever be able to address those, but at least the technical controls will be in place.
Olivia, really appreciate you joining us today, and I know that we've been trying to get this on the books, and you're a busy guy with all this work. Leave you with one more question that came in. What is the one misconception about CMMC you see the most in your work?
That there's really, it's the same, but there's two thoughts of this. It's one, it's not going to come, which we know it's here now today. And then the other misconception is once it's here, it'll definitely go away because it's going to be too hard. And I'm just going to let everybody know now that if you have those thoughts in your head, you're going to be left behind as an organization. And, if you're a thought leader in your organization and you think that CMMC is not important, I would say that this may be a resume generating event for you when that becomes time that you'll just have to adopt to it. Because to be honest with you, I go in and I brief dozens of organizations on CMMC weekly, and I can see their faces in these meetings. They're going, we've heard about this, blah, blah, blah. We've actually heard CIOs and CISOs from our universities go, yeah, we're just going to keep self-certifying. And that's when there's a huge disconnect. Either A, they're just unengaged, they're not engaged with the CMMC program. They don't have the understanding. And really, things like what you're doing at Ariento and getting this information out there, I think is important. But also, when you looking ahead around corners for CMMC, those people will become the thought leaders and the most successful with this program. Embrace the change, or, like we said in the Marines, embrace the suck. You're going to have to get through it. But once you're through it, you're going to find out that it's not only better for you as an organization, but it's better for your chances of acquiring more revenue.
Well said, Leo. I owe you a huge thanks. I know you're in high demand. The old Marine Corps connection, I think, got you on this. So thanks again, and good luck. I know you just sold your house. Good luck with building a new one, and then what is to come.
All right. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate having me on.